Brown County, Texas, May the 13th, 2016. 25-year-old Rhonda Shante Blankenship disappears without a trace.
Anytime you have a situation where someone has gone missing, in the back of your mind, there's always the concern that something terrible has happened.
Police and the local community begin a large-scale search for the vulnerable young woman.
She's such a sweet girl. Everybody wanted to do their best to help and try to find Shante.
Friends and family hope for the best, but days later, their worst fears are confirmed.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
We were looking for Shante Blankenship.
Okay.
We found her.
Getting to the cellar is when the awful things start happening, when we see Shante laying on the steps.
The level of injuries inflicted on her, it was beyond overkill.
Months turn to years and the case runs cold.
We had no idea who committed this crime.
All leads had been followed up. Tips slowed down.
Turning to a groundbreaking form of forensic science, they reignite hope for justice.
We had already spent a lot of money on DNA. Our budget was empty.
Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. Brown County, Texas, May the 13th, 2016. Local authorities are notified of a missing young woman, 25-year-old Rhonda Blankenship, known to family and friends as Shante.
She lived in a community called the North Lake community. It's up around the lake. Probably a couple thousand people live out there. There's Tamarack Mountain, Thunderbird Bay, and Harbor Point. They're all connected, and it's just a community where people live to be close to the lake.
That part of the lake, if you go out there, you would drive through and see that it's a hodgepodge of, different type housing. From trailer homes to manufactured homes to custom built, brick homes. You might have some folks that have houses out there that actually have considerable means, and whereas some folks out there, are more just living the, day-to-day existence in terms of finances.
25-year-old Rhonda Shante Blankenship, a gentle-spirited young woman, vanished from her small lakeside community.
In May 15th of 2016, I was contacted by the Brown County Sheriff's Office and requested to assist with a missing person.
Shante was a gorgeous, young, tiny girl. When you looked at her, you would never know, just from looking at her, that she had a cognitive disability.
I attended church twice a week there at North Lake Church, north of Brownwood Lake.
She liked to sing in the choir, and one of the things I was told was that she would hold a hymn book and she couldn't read the words. People were totally supportive of her.
Everyone knew and loved Shante. Everybody that I had talked to that had seen her, she was always waving at everybody who was driving down the road. She was always smiling. She was a joy to be around. She was just a good person.
Shante faced lifelong challenges sustained from injuries obtained in childhood.
Shante was unable to care for herself well enough to live independently. It had mostly come about as a result of her childhood and some abuse that she had suffered as a young child.
Despite her challenges, Shante had a steady presence in her life. Her grandfather, Charlie, who took responsibility in caring for her and her siblings.
Charlie had taken over responsibility for her, even though Charlie was quite old himself.
He was a very neat guy to talk to and interesting and had a nice background. He's former law enforcement. Charlie was a stand-up guy, and I think Charlie would have did anything he could for his family.
She was such a beautiful, innocent soul, having grown up in such a dreadful childhood where she was damaged and harmed by so many people when she was young, leading to her cognitive disabilities. And then to still be that sweet, beautiful soul that you see in the pictures, all of the pictures of her that we saw, she was smiling and just gorgeously happy and always seemed to be just a beautiful soul, even though she had been through so much.
I would describe her as kind of like, your 4 or 5-year-old in terms of abilities. It'd be easy to trick Shantae, easy to, fool her, but she was just such a good-hearted person and she would trust anybody. Shantae's sweetness, kindness ended up being her demise in the end of her willingness to trust somebody.
On the evening of May the 13th, 2016, Shantae goes out for a walk. Her grandfather becomes concerned when she doesn't return.
Shantae went for her normal walk that she normally does in the evening.
She went to the cafe that she liked to frequent. She walked around in that area that evening and was seen by several people.
The family got worried right away, and Charlie took it upon himself to drive around all night looking for her in an effort to find her, hoping that, maybe she was just hanging out with a friend or wandered off.
Mr. Barnett started looking for her and couldn't find her and contacted law enforcement.
We don't have a time frame. If somebody calls us and the circumstances don't look right, it doesn't matter if it's been a couple of hours or days. We don't worry about a time frame.
The law enforcement took into consideration all the factors that existed here with her intellectual disabilities and her lack of ability to really live independently.
When she went missing, no one really had any idea where she disappeared from. Nobody saw the moment when she left her neighborhood community. And so it just appeared that a person who had an intellectual disability had just disappeared and no one had any idea where she went.
The Friday night when she was last seen, well, just by coincidence, the pastor of North Lake Community Church, Ron Keener, and his wife, Elaine, well, they had been out driving around. They saw her walking. They waved at her and she waved at them. That would have been the last time that they ever saw her.
May 13th, the search was fairly limited because nobody really realized that she was completely missing until it became late in the evening. On May 14th, the community started to get more heavily involved in the search and it expanded.
This being a smaller community, everybody's pretty familiar with Shantae, and she's such a sweet girl. I think everybody wanted to do their best to help and try to find Shantae, so they were able to assemble pretty quickly, get together, create search teams, get organized, and start, looking through the various wooded areas close by, coming through the neighborhood in effort to try to find something that would indicate that either Shantae had been there or that they were on the right track in trying to find Shantae.
That is remarkable. That just shows the tight-knit community that we have here in Brown County, that everybody started looking for. There were groups that were providing food and water for searchers. Everybody came together for a common goal, is to find Shantae.
The search really started to expand on Sunday the 15th when everyone realized that this is not just a situation where Shantae was with somebody overnight and forgot to call her grandfather. This was really a situation where she was missing and something had happened. Anytime you have a situation where someone has gone missing, especially someone with the disabilities that Shantae had, that's always the fear that the worst has happened. You hope and pray that they'll be found and nothing will be wrong, but in the back of your mind, there's always the concern that something terrible has happened.
As the second day of searching comes to a close, The fear that something awful may have happened to Shantae is impossible to ignore.
Part of the search party, Charlie Radel and his wife decided to go away from the immediate area. They found an old abandoned house which kids would go to for parties. It was known as the Party House out in May.
This is in an area that's pretty close by where Shantae lived. It would be within 5 miles probably of North Lake community.
The old house was really creepy. It had a look of something that would certainly fit in any type of horror film. It was far enough out in the country that it was a great place to be involved in things that you didn't want other people to know about.
2 volunteers came to the old party house. The driver decided he was going to pull in there and they would do a check real quick there. And so as he pulled up to the gate, it's a locked gate. There had been fresh tire tracks, so he could see that somebody had been there recently as well. So he got up to the gate to climb over, noticed a big clump of hair, obviously stood out.
When they were standing there looking at the fence, they saw a multicolored bracelet, and then they went into the property through some tall weeds to the house to try to locate Shantae.
They kind of just followed a trail and saw a cellar that was overgrown and covered over, but thought maybe that's a place that we should look. Maybe she fell down in there. Maybe if something bad happened, maybe she is there.
Getting to the cellar is when the awful things start happening, when we see Shantae laying on the steps.
He had opened the cellar and looked in there, and that's where Shantae's body was lying, with her head further down into the cellar and her feet more up close to the top. So obviously appearing that Shantae had been dumped down into the cellar at that point.
911, what's the location of your emergency?
I have no idea where I'm at. I am in the middle of nowhere. We were looking for Shantae Blankenship.
Okay.
We found her.
That's when my phone rang that we didn't have a missing person anymore, we had a murder.
Brown County, Texas, 2016. Law enforcement and the local community are searching for missing 25-year-old woman Rhonda Blankenship. Known as Shantae to family and friends, she never returned from a walk. The discovery of Shantae's body in the cellar confirms everyone's worst fears.
She was unclothed from the waist down. You could see massive injuries to her face and neck and upper torso that was not clothed. You could see scrapes and bruises down her legs. All her clothes were thrown in there as well. She was just bloody from massive trauma to her body.
Gruesome scenes like this are just heart-wrenching and things that you never get out of your mind's eye. And this particular scene was one like that, where you could tell that a horrible thing had happened.
Shantae was found and it appeared like she had been thrown into the cellar head first. She was wearing a t-shirt and nothing else. We found a lawnmower blade close to the body, and it appeared that that might have been a murder weapon.
Shantae's of a slight build. She's less than 5 foot tall, maybe 90 pounds at the most. And to see the level of injuries inflicted on her, it was certainly over the top. You could just see, the person that did it wasn't just trying to kill her, but was definitely making a statement, and it was beyond overkill.
The Brown County Sheriff's Office is tasked with managing a complex homicide investigation with limited resources.
We are a small jurisdiction, so we don't have a crime scene team or a coroner. In our jurisdiction, it would be more likely that the law enforcement officers and the investigators responded and that they handle their own crime scene investigation.
Everything's important at a crime scene because you don't know what will be important later on. So everything that is collected, from the lawnmower blade to her clothing to her body, anything that would connect whoever did this to this horrible crime is collected.
When we first get there, you photograph everything before anybody walks on your crime scene. I'm there, the Texas Ranger Jason Shea had shown up then, had several patrol officers and other investigators. There was a lot of hair that had been pulled out of her head from the fence all the way to the cellar. Of course, we collect blood evidence for DNA. There was quite a bit of blood evidence we found. It had rained since Shantae's body had been dumped in there. You couldn't see a lot of it, but in the corners and cracks and places, we were able to find blood.
Shantae was unclothed from the waist down, clearly indicative that there had been some kind of sexual assault that had taken place as part of this crime. In this case, there was also a shoe print that was across Shantae's chest that was a pretty distinct pattern.
In Brown County, we have Justice of the Peace, who's a judge. They come out to the scene and pronounce somebody deceased. And they're also the ones that decide whether a body will be sent for an autopsy.
Autopsies are always important so that when we go to court, we can prove a cause of death and prove what happened. In this particular case, the autopsy was critical because there were a lot of injuries that we didn't know what caused them, and we were uncertain where they came from or how they got on the body.
She obviously had several blows, to her head from what appeared to be consistent with the lawnmower blade. She'd been stomped on. You could see the clear indication of that through the shoe prints left on Shantae. And then, of course, the recovery, of the semen likewise showed the sexual assault occurring as well.
She had injuries from her toes all the way to her top of her head. She was covered in injuries. Her face was just beat up, bloody, a solid bruise, basically. Cuts and gashes on her chin and throat.
She was beaten to death in layman's terms. The medical examiner determined that her larynx had been crushed and that she suffered blunt force trauma to her head and body, and that the combination of those things killed her.
We talked with Charlie and Michelle, her mother. We told her that she was killed with blunt force trauma and she was sexually assaulted. We did not tell any other information. And that's hard to do, looking at a mother and a grandfather who have a lot of questions, but we can't tell them because they will tell somebody else in the family who will then tell somebody else. And we've got to keep that information guarded.
You never know what kind of reaction you're going to get from a loved one when you tell them that their family member has been killed or is deceased. It's a hard thing because there's lots of emotions involved in that.
This particular type of situation where you're notifying family in a very violent situation is even harder because you, as a law enforcement officer, have to deal with the personal emotions of seeing it, as well as respecting the emotions of the person that you're talking to.
The family had that feeling, obviously, that something bad had happened. While it was certainly, difficult, I think there is probably a certain level of acceptance at that time that was probably going to be the fate in this case.
Shantae's family make funeral preparations to say goodbye to their loved one.
It was devastating to the community to find out that she had been murdered, not only murdered, but murdered in such a brutal way. Even without the community knowing the details of the murder, they knew that it needed to be a closed casket. They knew that she had been dumped in a rural location. And it was so much more traumatic because of how violent it was, that the damage to the community from going through that type of a situation was extreme.
The extent of Shantae's injuries revealed the enormous amount of suffering that she faced before she died. Homicide investigators faced the challenge of finding the person responsible. Shantae was a beloved member of the community who are determined to assist the investigation.
There were so many leads and so many different tips that were given to law enforcement. The hardest part, I think, was sorting through all of the different tips and leads and eliminating people.
We had tips from people from New York to here to all over the place. We had a psychic call us and try to tell us she was killed by a woman.
The suspicion falls on Shantae's own boyfriend.
He became a suspect during a portion of the case for a while. They had been dating for a couple of years, and he was obviously a suspect very quickly in the investigation.
He had an airtight alibi. He was at work, and that work had cameras, so we knew where he was the day and evening Shantae went missing.
It's fair to say that anytime you have sex offenders and an offense like this where it's a murder, where sexual assault was committed, an obvious good starting point is look through your local sex offender registry. Anytime you start an investigation like that, you want to be thorough. An obvious starting point would be the sex offender database.
Law enforcement looked at anyone in the community in that area who would have known Shantae, that she would have trusted enough to get into a vehicle with, because Shantae was not likely to go with someone that she didn't know. So initially the focus was on people close to her.
It's pretty typical that the murderer would know the victim in the case, and a lot of times they return many times to being around the center of what's going on during the aftermath.
May 20th, 2016, there was a funeral at North Lake Church. Appeared to be about over 400 people attended, with law enforcement also having a presence there.
During the funeral, law enforcement was looking to see if there was anyone at the funeral who might be acting in a way that would give us a clue about who had committed the crime.
And so if you pay close attention to, number one, who's attending, keep up with the log of who all signs in and so forth, it's probably a pretty good list you start looking through and just seeing if anybody catches your eye off the list. And so I think that's what law enforcement was doing, making sure they documented all that attended the funeral, and so that they could come back later and individually look and see if there was anybody that kind of stood out.
Investigators considered two possibilities. Was Shantae's killer someone she knew, or had an outsider passing through lured her to her death?
The DNA was sent to a forensic laboratory where a DNA profile was obtained for the unknown suspect.
Investigators hope they can use the DNA sample recovered from the sexual assault kit to identify Shantae's killer.
That DNA profile was entered into the CODIS system to see if a match could be obtained so that we could determine a suspect to look into further.
CODIS is the combined DNA index system, so all unsolved crimes, DNA profiles that are collected in those are uploaded in the CODIS and compared to known offenders.
We were looking at some of the people we deal with quite frequently that we knew had contact with Shantae. If we had any kind of feeling that somebody wasn't being completely honest, the guys would ask for a DNA sample just to see if they agreed or if maybe they had something else to hide. We were really looking for that one person to tell us, no, you're not getting my DNA. If you had something to hide, then maybe you wouldn't give your DNA.
Unfortunately, there were no hits through CODIS for any DNA matches, and there were no hits through CODIS on any familial DNA matches either.
Familial DNA is basically taking genealogy mixed in with the DNA component and trying to locate a common relative of defendants. and kind of working backward from that standpoint to identify defendants.
That ruled out a lot of suspects that would have been high on the suspect list because their DNA profile would have already been in CODIS through the criminal justice system.
With initial suspects ruled out, investigators pressed on, determined to find a break in the case.
When they offered the financial reward for tips, there were several Crime Stoppers tips that were provided to law enforcement. None of them panned out upon investigation.
Despite the Crime Stoppers reward and DNA testing of potential suspects, detectives remained at a standstill.
Since all of the DNA samples that were provided for top suspects came back not matching anyone. And so we started wondering, could it have been someone who is not from this area who was traveling through? Especially given the gruesomeness of it, there was a real concern that this was someone who had potentially murdered and raped before. And so part of the investigation was thinking about, are there other crimes similar to this that have happened in other locations by someone who travels around and commits these types of crimes?
After that DNA profile was entered into CODIS and there was no match, tips slowed down. It's not like the community lost sight of it. There were just, all leads had been followed up at that time.
Almost a full year and a half where we had no idea who committed this crime. It was considered unsolved in our office, waiting for further investigation, and it was in a cold case status for law enforcement, just looking for some tip to be able to break it back open and be able to restart the case.
A year out, when they were commemorating or memorializing a year having passed since Shantae's death, I know that that kind of hit everybody and took everybody back as a reminder of, we need to double down and get back to looking, is there something else we can be doing, and re-looking at some of these stuff that's already been looked at.
Despite the setbacks, investigators are determined to bring resolution to the community and solve Shantae's brutal murder once and for all. With revolutionary science on the horizon, they are closer than ever to identifying the killer, but will they be able to bring him to justice? Detectives in Brown County, Texas are investigating the violent sexual assault and murder of 25-year-old Rhonda Shantae Blankenship over a year earlier, whose brutalized body was discovered in an abandoned cellar on May 15, 2016. After many dead ends, cutting-edge technology offers new hope of solving the case.
There was a television show that had caught one of the deputies' attention, and that deputy brought it to the attention of investigator Scott Bird that there is the possibility of doing DNA testing using something that was new to us called phenotyping to develop a picture of the suspect, kind of like a crime scene sketch photo from an eyewitness, but using DNA to create that picture.
So I had to get on the computer just to try to wrap my head to see what it is. I read quite a bit about it and I thought, this could be very helpful. And I called Parabon and spoke with the president of Parabon and tried to get him to explain to me how he could take DNA and get me a computer image of a person. I was very skeptical, so I asked him to give me some references, give me law enforcement agencies that have actually used your system.
Phenotyping is predicting somebody's physical traits and their ancestry from their DNA alone. It is looking at hundreds of thousands of genetic markers across the genome, called SNPs, that can help to predict someone's eye color, skin color, hair color, and other physical traits like shape face.
Phenotyping was new in our field, and the cost was a lot, especially for a small agency. There's no budget or line item for doing phenotype testing.
We had already spent a lot of money on DNA, and our budget was empty. So I went to the district attorney and said, look, will you split this with our office so we can get this done? Well, the district attorney had never heard of that or was not real familiar with phenotyping either, so he was skeptical of whether it'd be admissible in court, whether it would work or not, and he was hesitant on it. It took a while of me talking to both the sheriff and the district attorney to get them both to agree to split the cost of it.
When you have a cold case, especially in a world where you are convinced that someone who does something that brutal, this isn't going to be their only crime. It's not going to be the only time they hurt someone. Any expense that you can possibly pay is worth it to try to figure out who committed the crime and to hold them responsible and to protect the community from whatever they may do in the future.
When you start thinking outside the box and you pick a new type technology, it's like you have to evaluate, is this the best new technology first to take a chance on? So it's not the skeptical of the science, it's just, is that the best, angle for this? And I think in the end, we decided it was, and so decided to move forward on that.
The sheriff's office contacted a lab and requested SNP testing. And so that STR profile, or that DNA extract from the same exam, was sent to Parabon for the phenotyping.
That DNA evidence that was collected through the swabs of Shantae's body was then submitted to Parabon through methods that contained documentation about how the evidence was transferred, who transferred it, and making sure that it wasn't altered or changed in any way.
When we gave them the permission or gave them the authorization to do this, I believe I had the image in about 3 weeks.
November 6, 2017, Parabon reached out to the agency to let them know that the snapshot phenotyping, imaging, and predictions were complete.
I'm in my office and I get an email from Parabon. I open it and it gives first a description, what the person's eye color would be, whether they have freckles, are their earlobes attached, what color is their hair. They couldn't give us big things, couldn't give us age, of course can't give you weight. And then you scroll down and there is a computer generated image from DNA of a white male with a few freckles, light skin tone, at about age 25.
It's kind of hard to express what you feel when you see just the composite sketch by itself, because you don't have any measure or any standard to say this is accurate or this is not accurate. You're just relying on this technology that sounds great and it sounds really exciting, but you've never seen it in action before. So it looks like a person. It looks like a young man that could be anybody that you could run into on the street.
When I saw that snapshot, it didn't look like anybody that we had interviewed or made contact with.
The sheriff's office had sent out word to the local media to ask if we could be there for this press conference related to the Shantae case. So we got there, and it was myself and some of the local radio people, TV media was there. That's when Sheriff Hill displayed what the suspect might look like.
Once that snapshot was released, we had some tips that had come in, and they believed they had identified whoever the potential suspect might be.
When law enforcement showed the snapshot phenotype to Shantae's family, one of her brothers stated that it looked like a young man named Ryan Riggs. He was a 21-year-old neighbor of theirs. He wasn't close to the family, but he had attended school with some of Shantae's family members, and he was an acquaintance of her current boyfriend.
The number of people that confirmed that this looked like Ryan Riggs. Not even as part of the investigation, just as part of the community chatter that was going on. It felt like confirmation before I even saw the photo of Ryan next to the composite photo.
The funds spent on the DNA phenotyping have paid off. Investigators finally have a prime suspect.
When we pulled up his social media and saw a picture of him, it was nearly identical to the Parabon phenotyping image that they gave us.
Ryan was from that same community, so he lived out there close to Shantae, had a family that lived out there at the lake, and somebody that obviously had known family members. The brother of Shantae had been friends with him at some point. They went to school together. So he definitely had the connections, would have known Shantae. Shantae would have been familiar with him, which would have given him an easy in at Shantae.
When he was a juvenile, he had stolen a gun from a residence. So really, that's about the only criminal history that we had on him.
It was obvious that Ryan was a suspect in the murder case, but communicating that directly to Ryan would have jeopardized the investigation.
Law enforcement must come up with a plan to get Ryan's DNA without alerting him that he is their person of interest in Shantae's murder.
It was discovered that within the community, he had been dumping bags of trash out in the community without properly disposing of them. So we thought, it would be a good way to get him in front of some officers to talk with him.
Law enforcement is allowed to use ruses in our investigation, and I thought that was a good ruse to try to make contact with him.
He did violate the law by dumping trash, so we got an arrest warrant for him for illegal dumping. We were just going to arrest him at his home, bring him into the office, get him into the office, and then I was going to interview him. Officers went out there. He was home, but he would not answer the door. He said he knew when he saw 4 deputies knocking on his front door that we were on to him, and he went on the run.
Ryan was gone for about 3 days, and no one knew where he was during that time frame. Somewhere out in the county, staying in some rural location where no one could identify him or locate him.
Brown County Sheriff's investigators mobilize every resource to track down Ryan Riggs.
We did have a phone number, and we were going to start using cell phone data to try to identify and locate where this individual was at.
Everybody in the office on patrol, everybody was looking for Ryan. My wife and I were in the kitchen fixing supper, about to start cooking, and I look over and my phone's ringing, and it's the sheriff. I answer the phone, as I always do. "Hey, boss." And he said, "Get to the office. Ryan Riggs has just confessed at the church in Northlake."
Brown County, Texas, 2017. It's been a year since the gruesome discovery of 25-year-old Rhonda Shantae Blankenship's body in an abandoned cellar. With the help of advanced DNA phenotyping technology, investigators finally have a prime suspect in the case. 21-year-old Ryan Riggs went on the run, but he soon confesses in a Northlake church to the murder.
On November 15th, 2017, Ryan went to Northlake Community Church, stood up in front of the congregation, and proclaimed, "I am a murderer. I killed Shantae Blankenship."
Ryan wanted to confess to the congregation, so I think the pastor allowed him to do that. Maybe that he just needed to get that off his chest. I was surprised that he did that. I'd never seen a confession or somebody get in front of a church and make a statement like that.
Why he went is such a hard question to unpack, and that's why resolving the case was so difficult. Some people believed that he was remorseful when he confessed to being a murderer. Some people felt he was emotionless and not remorseful at all.
Certainly, he had all the makings that you would see anytime you look at serial killer studies. He had that seed to be a serial killer one day. I think the only thing that kept that from coming to fruition was the fact that he got caught on his first time out.
Ryan is taken into custody. Investigators are determined to get the full story of what happened the day Shantae died.
Ryan came in, we set him down. This was a non-custodial interview. He wasn't under arrest. We wanted to know everything we could get. We wanted to know how, why, when, and where that this all happened.
I told him, I understand you have something you want to tell us, and he just started talking of how he killed Shantae, how he was a demon, how he'd always wanted to rape and murder, and with no emotion at all. Sheriff just gave me a call a little while ago and said that you got something off your chest, and we're just going to see if you tell us what you got off your chest.
I'm the one who murdered Shantae Blankenship. I've always had this different part of me that it just wants nothing but destruction and evil. And whenever I saw her that day, it took over. So I knew what I was trying to get, or what it was trying to get. It wanted to kill somebody. It wanted to rape. I just don't know how to describe it. I wanted both things that happened, the rape and the murder. This thing that took control of me, like I explained, it's almost like Satan. I knew what I wanted, and it just happened. Like it was my eyes just watching my body do these actions without any thought to it.
When he saw Shantae standing by the mailboxes, he figured that was a good, easy time to get her, and so he took advantage of the fact that they knew each other.
He picked her up, asked her if she wanted to go listen to some music in his truck. They drove up to a secluded area and sat there and listened to music.
He put his arm around her, and then he strangled her unconscious. He said he then sexually assaulted her, and he knew he had to get rid of her body. So he took her out to that abandoned house where her body was found in a cellar.
She did survive the initial attack. He was clear in his interview that she was still moving after the initial brutality.
He felt that he needed to finish her off to make sure that she didn't go tell on him.
When he got her out of the truck at that abandoned house, he heard her breathing as she was moving, so he knew she was still alive. He first tried to cut her throat, but his knife was dull, so it wouldn't cut. And he remembered the lawnmower blade in the back of his truck, so he took it out and beat her to death with it.
In that process, admitted that he had stomped her chest as just part of that overall effort and trying to inflict enough injuries to her to make sure that she was dead by the time he left her.
I believe he had fantasized about it for years, and he knew Shantae would be an easy target.
With Ryan's confession secured, prosecutors prepare to bring him to trial.
We talked through all of the options that we had, whether to go forward with the death penalty or to choose to resolve the case through an agreement for life without parole.
Once you hear the confession, you know the next half of that investigation is fixing to start, and that's delving into the background and history of this particular defendant to see what the real likelihood of us, uncovering enough bad acts to actually make him one of the worst to qualify him for the death penalty.
Ryan pled guilty on February 15th of 2019 to capital murder and received life without parole. That means that he will never be able to leave the prison system in Texas.
It was a mixed reaction. We had a lot of people wondering why the death penalty was not sought, but there were also a lot of people that were just thankful that he was going to prison and he is not eligible to ever get out. He will die in prison.
pled guilty, took his lumps. They cuffed him, walked him out, and that was the last we ever saw of Ryan Riggs.
This case is distinct in how it played out in the community and how personal it became because it lasted so long, and it was a part of our lives for 3 years, and you just could never step away from the case, and so it became one that we will remember forever.
Thanks to DNA phenotyping, investigators were able to solve a case once thought unsolvable and bring resolution to Shantae's family.
I think it's very likely Ryan would have killed again just based on his own statements. And so in this case, I feel confident saying that the snapshot phenotype predictions got a very violent criminal off the streets and potentially saved lives.
It solved the case for us. I don't know how much longer it would have taken for us to find Ryan, but it's the one that led us to Ryan.